Let's begin with the major overhaul of Ford's assembly plant in Oakville, Ontario. The federal government and Ontario are each investing $295 million to produce electric vehicles and the batteries that power them. This is part of a nearly $2 billion agreement announced last month between the automaker and its union, and it will make the plant Ford's #1 electric vehicle factory in all of North America. For more, we reach Innovation Minister Baines in Ottawa. Welcome back to the program, Minister Baines.
Glad to be back. Thanks very much, Catherine.
Now, I do want to ask you, Canadians have seen the auto sector receive millions upon millions of dollars from governments and still lay off workers. I wonder what you say to Canadians who are going to see you make this investment, hundreds of millions of dollars in the auto sector again, and wonder if this is really good use of their money.
Well, the future looks bright, and we fundamentally believe that the industry is going through a major transformation. And we want to make sure that Canada continues to play a leadership role. And that's what this investment is about. It's about investing in future opportunities in the automotive sector and making sure that Canadians can have access to good quality middle-class jobs.
So let's talk a bit about those jobs. What I would like to know is, with the money that you have agreed to invest, and of course the provincial government in Ontario agreeing to invest as well, are there any guarantees that these jobs won't be cut over any period of time?
That's a great question, Catherine, and that was the #1 priority for us. It's about how do we make sure this benefits the workers, both the direct workers on the production line and the indirect jobs as well. So we were able to secure 5,400 jobs for the next 10 years.
With a guarantee that there will be no layoffs.
Well, we say that because, and we're confident that will be the case, and that's exactly what we were able to obtain, because the market for zero-emission vehicles is growing by the day. For example, today in Canada, there's 136,000 zero-emission vehicles on the road. And that number is projected to grow to 13.2 million by 2030. So the market is there, consumer demand is there, and this investment is going to be critical to secure those 5,400 jobs over the next 10 years. And these are not simply jobs on the production line, but also the indirect jobs with suppliers and dealerships as well.
So there's no, just to be clear though, you're saying like the market's there, so of course that should ensure the jobs, but do you have it in writing from the company itself? Yes, okay.
We were very clear that we wanted to make this investment. Of course, we're very excited about the investment, but it also boils down to growth in jobs. And so there's tremendous growth opportunities in the market, but also about securing 5,400 good quality production jobs.
Let's talk a little bit more about that market and about getting Canadians to purchase these electric vehicles. As you know very well, Ontario no longer offers a rebate on electric vehicles, and there was a real decline in purchases after that happened. This is something that came up at the news conference today, although I don't think we got a crystal clear answer. Has your government approached the Ford government and suggested bringing back that rebate on the provincial level?
So it's a great question as well, because this is a holistic approach. This investment is part of a broader strategy. We've engaged the mining sector to take advantage of the raw materials like lithium, cobalt, like nickel, and make sure that we take advantage of those resources and create value here in Canada through the production of batteries. We've invested in critical infrastructure and charging stations. And as you said, we've also introduced a rebate program. And I raised this with my colleague and provincial counterpart, Vic Fedeli, and he understands that this is the key component of the success that we want to see through consumers purchasing more zero-emission vehicles, which is good not only for production out here in Canada, but also good for the environment as well.
So are you hinting then that you think Ontario is going to bring that rebate back?
Well, I mean, that's a question you got to ask them. I mean, they have.
Well, I'd like to know what your impression is, Minister.
Oh, look, I've been very clear that it would be absolutely beneficial to consumers to create the incentives to purchase more zero-emission vehicles. We feel this is the right strategy, and that is why we have made the investments at the federal level through the rebate program that we've introduced. Mm-hmm. And we want to see other jurisdictions step up as well.
Well, my understanding is when it comes to the federal rebate program that you've actually worked your way through most of the budget for that. And I wonder if you're prepared to extend it.
Again, I don't want to prejudge any future announcements, but because of the success of the program, because of our government's commitment to hitting and exceeding our 2030 climate change targets, we're going to continue to look at all our tools in the toolbox to be able to create more opportunities for consumers and Canadians to purchase zero-emission vehicles.
I know you don't want to scoop yourself, Minister, but it seems like you're saying this is the way we're going. We should expect that budget to be extended.
We're very excited about the announcements we made in this automotive industry package today around the $1.8 billion investment in Oakville for the production of their battery electric vehicles. But we know that's one component of a broader strategy. I talked about engaging a resource sector and mining sector. I've talked about the fact that we have rebates and infrastructure programs in place. But it's also important to highlight that we also have market access for these vehicles. Because of the new NAFTA and because of the free trade agreement that we have with Europe, we can build these vehicles and export them to these key markets and become a true global leader when it comes to zero-emission vehicles.
What do you say to folks in Alberta who are watching this today, who already feel that the auto sector gets favored, people in the oil and gas sector who are experiencing a lot of financial hardship right now and who might think, frankly, this hurts?
Look, this is not about pitting one region against another region or one sector against another. We want to build back better. We want to do it in a sustainable way. And today's announcement speaks to the resource sector, speaks to the mining sector. This is about bringing Canadians together, about creating more value here, more opportunities here. And this is not the only sector that we're going to invest in and partner with. We're going to continue to work with the oil and gas sector, the aerospace sector, the tourism sector, many different aspects of our economy that have been significantly impacted because of the COVID-19 crisis. We want to work with them and collaborate with them to create opportunities for Canadians right across Canada.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask you one more question that speaks to your government's strategy on investments, and it has to do with this Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on superclusters, saying that so much of the budget that you would hope to get out the door, I believe it was supposed to be $104 million by this point, this is as of March 6th, instead of $104 million, only $30 million was spent, the vast majority of that on administrative costs. In fact, it's only $12 million that's actually going towards projects. So does that not trouble you?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because if you look at the Parliamentary Budget Officer's timeline, the costs only reflect investments up until February. It doesn't take into account the full year investments. By the end of March, all those investments were made, and the superclusters have significant number of projects, over 200 projects, over $800 million of total investment, including the vast majority of that, or the majority of that being from the private sector. So we're going to update those numbers on the department website. But unfortunately, the Parliamentary Budget Officer's numbers do not reflect the full year investments.
So all that money went flying out the door after March 6th then, more than $70 million.
You can appreciate this as well when it comes to the investments that are made and projects that come up. Many of them, in some cases, are left to the last possible month for a variety of reasons. And so we saw a significant uptake in those projects in the month of March, which was not reflected in the report.
Okay, we're going to leave the conversation there. Thank you so much for your time today, Minister Baines.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks very much for having me on.
I think one of the things that Canadians are recognizing and extremely happy about is that different orders of government have come together.
Rather than bickering and arguing and pointing fingers at each other, when we're all pulling in the same direction, this is the result that we get.
It was something of a split-screen press conference. The Prime Minister and Ontario Premier Doug Ford singing from the same songbook on boosting Ontario's manufacture of electric vehicles. Two levels of government are chipping in $295 million each as part of last month's $1.8 billion deal between Ford Motors and Unifor. The Oakville plant will start making 5 new electric car models. Is this the right investment at the right time? And what do we make of the Prime Minister and the Premier getting along so well these days? Let's ask the Power Panel in Denholm, Quebec. David Hurley, partner in the Gandalf Group and host of the Hurley Burley podcast. In Toronto, Jenny Byrne, former top staffer to Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, now a principal at Jenny Byrne and Associates. Also in Toronto, Andrew Thompson, Chief of Government Relations for the University of Toronto and former Saskatchewan Finance Minister. And in Montreal, Émilie Nicolas is a columnist with Le Devoir. Welcome back, everybody. David, I am going to start with you. I think there was something, some of us smiled seeing the Prime Minister and the Premier just so gosh darn happy to see each other today. But was this a good move on both their parts? This pretty big injection of cash into the auto sector, which has been, fraught in its own way in the past.
I think it is. It's obvious that electric cars are the way of the future. Ontario has provided some leadership in trying to advance the car industry here, the auto industry here, by getting into, for instance, automated, becoming a leader in testing automated driving vehicles. So this is important. I remember once when I was working with Premier Wynne and we had a tour of the Magna auto plant, and Don Walker, the head of Magna, said to her, he said, don't bother trying to get another auto plant. You won't be able to get one. But do everything you can to avoid losing another one, because every time you lose one is a critical blow to the auto parts manufacturing and all the related industries that support that sector. So there are a lot of jobs at stake, and I really think that it's a very positive sign that both levels of government work together to step up and keep that plant in operation.
Jenny, I want to ask you, the Ford government scrapped the zero emissions rebate policy on electric vehicles earlier on. Does this, given that the Premier was talking up electric vehicles quite a bit today, does this create some pressure on them to bring that rebate back?
No, I think this is an announcement about jobs. I think that one thing that Premier Ford has been very clear on in the last 6 months, more so since the pandemic started, is that he's somewhat put partisanship aside in terms of his relationship, especially with the federal government. He's been very conciliatory with both Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, and I think that this is just an extension to this. I think this is talking about thousands of jobs within kind of the golden horseshoe, and I think that's very important for this government. I think where the Premier has to be careful with is he has had a much different campaign and a different past in talking about corporate welfare. I know that in the 2018 campaign he talked about scrapping corporate welfare. So this is going to be something that, although people are happy, it's very conciliatory and they're getting along now. Let's see where we're at in 6 months when we probably see the Liberals wanting to head to the polls and see how conciliatory the Prime Minister will be towards Doug then.
Yeah, it made me think of those infamous stickers on the gas pumps. That just seems like so long in the past. Now here they are talking about cars and so much more friendly. Andrew, I want to bring you in and just ask to what extent this move is kind of eating the NDP's lunch in particular.
Well, I don't think it has impacted the NDP. I mean, what we're seeing happen here is both of these levels of government are working from they work in what is, I would describe, the national interest, and they work within a partisan political interest. Mm-hmm. On the national interest is a bit like what David is saying, where they are really trying to, I think, not just capture or not protect the direct manufacturing jobs, but make sure that they secure the supply chain that's going to come out of the electric vehicles. That's a great opportunity for Ontario and for Canada, and I think that's a smart move. They're also very keenly aware that of the roughly 50 seats that stretch from Oshawa down into southwestern Ontario through the manufacturing belt, the so-called Golden Horseshoe outside of Toronto, half of those are held federally by Liberals, half are held provincially by Conservatives. Mm. And the fact that they've got that dual representation, they are fighting very much for those votes within those seats. They're federally Liberal, provincially Conservative. They need to show that they can work together, because those voters, they want to return essentially the same verdict. So this isn't so much a fight that squeezes out the NDP. It's in these fights where you have these red-blue switchers trying to really protect the gains that they've got within their own electoral boundaries.
Emily, I want to bring you in, and there's so much talk about how the number of jobs involved, we can imagine how meaningful this is for the communities that are affected, be they people who specifically work at the plant or the various jobs that are created in proximity to that. But for people who don't fall into that group, who aren't in that golden horseshoe we've heard the other panelists talking about, how do you think this plays? Do people care? Is there some trepidation at seeing, Jenny talked earlier about the idea of corporate welfare.
Yeah, the idea of corporate welfare is always a tricky one. Mm-hmm. And I think the solution to that is more, I guess, communication and explanation in terms of why can't a company like Ford invest in electric cars by themselves while they're being very profitable? Mm-hmm. Like, why is the government help needed, because I think when we have those conversations, that's the part that we miss. We're like, oh, jobs are important, therefore the government should invest. But that's the part of the argument that is hard to find, actually, is why wouldn't those actually car companies being able to do it themselves? And if so, why? And is it just because they want to keep their margin of profit high? And so yeah, I think those are questions that just would demand a lot more public transparency communication in terms of exactly what's going on, to be able to get people on board if that's necessary, and also, start critical conversations if that's also necessary as well.
I'd like to leverage the knowledge of the other members of the power panel and ask David to answer that question in particular. Emily raises an interesting point. If it's such a great investment, if it's the future, why isn't the company just doing it on its own without this government help, David?
Well, Ford builds cars all over the world, and they have plants all over the world, and they have been in recent decades much more interested in those plants in other parts of the world than they have been in Canada. One of the reasons for that is lower wages and lower costs of production for them. Canada compensates for that with a highly educated workforce and with good health care and with a stable political environment. But at the end of the day, places like Alabama, other jurisdictions are going to be offering Ford money to come. And so we can be objectively the best place, but if somebody else is going to put $500 million in Ford's pocket, they're going to take it. So we have to, it's not a pleasant fact. It's not something that makes you feel good. It's just a reality that if we're going to be in the game for attracting this kind of new investment, we have to play that game.
Jenny, I wonder, I guess the other aspect of all of this is we have been hearing from Alberta, Saskatchewan, the frustrations around the oil and gas sector not getting more support. And I imagine it stings a little bit extra with this feeling that Ontario gets extra attention, perhaps Quebec Aerospace as well. Do you think the Prime Minister's office needs to be cognizant of that aspect of all of this? Or is that just not the politics of this Prime Minister's office?
Well, they should be cognizant of it. This is something that should have been on their radar from the last election. We've had lots of conversations about the fact that that this is a government that was shut out of two provinces. There's 1,800 kilometers between their Winnipeg seat and their British Columbia seat. Those are two big provinces there that have been hurting. And in the case of Alberta, their economy took a hit in terms of oil prices well before the COVID pandemic hit. So I think that this is something that the government should be cognizant of. But as Andrew said earlier, it is a very vote-rich area where Doug and Trudeau made this announcement today, and that obviously is a factor that both these governments had when going into this announcement today.
I feel like there's a little bell that goes off somewhere every time a power panelist says vote-rich area.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.